should point out though, when we think about doing feature films cheaply, you'll see up here, well, where's that? Following. How many people have seen Following by Christopher Nolan? Christopher Nolan's first feature film was shot on film, 16 millimeter, for $6,000. So that sort of sets the parameters on the notion of, well, what can I do? Because I was like, wow, how did he do that? But if you read up on how he did it, he made it with family and friends and all, he had all these techniques going into play to do that. You know, it's shot on location, borrowed spaces, all of those kinds of things on there. I should point out that that historic year that Greta Gerwig and Nolan were battling for the Academy Awards was interesting, because they're sort of at the peak of the Hollywood, you mentioned the industry. I'm not a big industry fan. I think that's a big failing of our universities, that we focus on that track, because Nolan didn't do it, neither did Greta Gerwig, and they're now at the peak of the game. And did anybody know about Greta Gerwig? So we know Nolan started out shooting a $6,000 film, right? And that putting forward to these different things. Why is Greta Gerwig important to us in Chicago?
Well, because she started off in theater, I believe, and then she started off working with Joe Swanberg. So
Yeah.
her first films, I think it was Hannah Takes the Stairs, or is that Kissing on the Mouth?
That was LOL. I gotta check what your first film was. But she started out with Joe Swanberg in Chicago as an actor. And actor is a loose term on Swanberg's productions, because this is gonna get, everybody does jobs. Because when Joe Swanberg is usually running the camera, if he's gonna be in a scene, he's gonna go, okay, you run the camera this time. And so Greta Gerwig started out working with what's called mumblecore film, which were ultra low budget films shot on usually DV tape cameras, all this kind of stuff. And that's how she started out. She stayed in that with Frances Ha, in that sort of on the edge of mumblecore, which then propelled her into where she is now. So often the track that you get in the university system, which I'm part of, is actually dysfunctional in a way. In other words, if you want to be a film director, following that arc of going to school, right, and thinking that you're going to walk out and somehow, by working on projects, being PAs or something like that, you're going to somehow matriculate up. And this is like a really short list. These are all people that did an alternate route, okay? Greg Araki, first film actually was $3,000. Some of these I was like rechecking the numbers on. His first two features were $3,000. El Mariachi by Robert Rodriguez, shot on film, right? For $7,000. We did Primer, Shane Carruth is sort of the most famous sci-fi film most of you maybe have not heard about. Was shot really cheaply, and he does most of his films are under that. Kissing on the Mouth, I did Joe Swanberg, and then Chicago's own James Troy, who's a big advocate of micro-budget or no-budget films, and I put an Empty Space, I think was $5,000, and it was shot in Iowa, so all that budget came together. So my point is, there is this alternate route to how you get things done on that. And if you should all watch the Mark Duplass at South by Southwest video, where he talks about, you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on college, or you can just get some equipment and start doing weekend shoots every weekend, assembling a community around yourself, and practice, practice, practice. And then there's a bunch of other rules he refers to in there. But with that said, this is an alternate way to success, rather than thinking you're going to crew your way to the top, so to speak, which doesn't usually work that well, unless you want to be a technician, like an editor, or you just want to be a grip or something. But I should say, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a grip is probably a bad value at this point in history. So now, when we talk about no budget filmmaking, this term is really loose at one level, because if you read around, people call this a no budget film, this a micro budget. I use for my my sort of definition, looking at film festivals and some other stuff like that have actually no budget categories. And it's usually films under $10,000. Some have it even less than that. And then micro budget is everything above that to $100,000 to $50,000. This market feeds into, I should point out, if you look at what happens here, that most of these people, and James Choi from DePaul can talk about this, they leverage these films. You make your film for $5,000, which then allows you to talk to producers or gather a community around of people who are willing to invest for the $25,000 film. And you'll see that, like, can anybody else give me any of these micro budget films? Some that you're familiar with, they're really famous. Clerks.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna give you $25,000. Blair Witch Project, you know, how much is that thing worth now? And now it came in at around 25,000. I'm giving the average 28,000. There's a whole range of films where people went from this kind of low budget paradigm and into the micro budget paradigm and Paranormal Activities, which is just holy crap, you know, shot for really about $20,000 and remixed, and that whole franchise is now worth hundreds of millions of dollars on this. So this is sort of an alternate way of looking at things about how you're going to produce the system. So I also point out that it's a philosophy, it's a holistic system. It's not necessarily I'm going to go into the system with this kind of notion, oh, we're going to make a feature film to industry standards, et cetera, but here's some techniques where we can get the budget down a little. It really is a holistic process as I teach it, because what's fundamentally important about no budget filmmaking is it is a democratizing system. It gives access to much wider ranges of people. Your film was what, 1,000?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm betting if somebody gave me a cash bet, said, can you make a film for $500 a feature? I would take that bet, okay, that it can be done, and it has been done historically. And then you can then roll those films into other projects on that. But it's, the key notion is that it opens the system up to everyone, or almost everyone, and that then allows for a wide range of diversity, of diverse views. So, you know, once again, we've been waiting for decades for Hollywood to diversify, right? And it's been long and coming, slow and not there yet, whereas now young people are making films that are countering the system, that are contesting its images of gender and race and all of these different issues. And so micro budget and no budget film is the actual pathway to reaching what I would call a truly diverse cinematic space out there. And that also diversity also is like stylistically, can make films that don't look like other people's films, that may be risky. The reason I do this is, and if we watch one of my films, they're not gonna be probably not like Paranormal Activity, but I also kind of take an experimental approach and I go, well, if I'm only spending this much money and it's covered, that's great, because I did what I wanted to do. I made the film I wanted to make, we experimented with storylines, plots, all these different things. So this mode gives us the chance for diversification on that. So if you look at like Christopher Nolan, people like that, they make these films and then they make another film that shouldn't have been made in Hollywood, Memento, right? Highly experimental narrative structure, right? Which could only be made as a fairly, that would be low budget, not micro budget. But my point is that this is a route to a range, sort of diversity across the system that's affecting it at that level. So, feature films. So, no budget's kind of a euphemism. There's probably a budget somewhere, but I'm really talking about my films come in between $5,000 and $10,000. But, like I said, I will take the bet to make a film for even much less than that. But this is where we come into, well, how do you do that? Now, once again, there's different styles. I was trained in the industry, right? So it's kind of like, ooh, you know, I still like pretty films. Certain kind of style that's locked into my head. But that also comes out of my film history. I adopt a lot of stuff from, you know, 20s and 30s and 40s, you know, like the French New Wave, different things like that, come into my filmmaking. And so everybody has sort of a stylistic choice, and as we know, that can be radically different from handheld digital camera, which I use in some films, to really locked down digital cameras that look very cinematic, that whole kind of thing. Now, so how do we do this? It really starts with thinking about ideas. Okay, let me find this. And this is, Duplass talks about this, you know, you really have to think about what's called right for resources. We all have big ideas, and I have lots of little notes of big idea films, but then when you start clicking out, well, what it's gonna cost? Oh, like I have a great road film movie. There's no way that's gonna be made cheaply. That's gonna have to, somebody's gonna have to come in with a lot of money to pay for that film. So right for resource means that you're going to be, your story ideas are gonna develop from your study of your resource base. Do you actually have access to producers and people who are gonna give you money? Most of the time, that doesn't work, okay? You can spend years going out there and trying to raise money for your films in the traditional, you know, the whole fascination with pitching, going to pitch events and somebody from Hollywood is gonna give you $500,000 or $1 million. That is a rare event, okay? So writing for resources is you have an understanding of your environment. And I can't put these in a hierarchical order because to a certain degree, you have to prepare, you know, like I talk about as ensemble development, community ensemble. In other words, you should be working on short films and develop a group of people around you that become like an ensemble that you can call on and say, hey, you want to do camera on this film? And by the way, you have a camera, right? In other words, and that could be actors. You could segue with, you know, get together with a theater company that might be interested in this and say, hey, I'll shoot some of the, you know, some of your practices for you if you want that. And will you then have people that'll work on my film and all of that. So writing for resources means that when you go into a film, you're already thinking about its cost. And you're thinking about the parameters on that cost, and you don't write a script for a film that's going to cost $100,000 to $1 million. That is ostensibly a waste of time unless you go into it with the notion that we can always dial it back. That doesn't necessarily work well, though. I think a film that's designed from the foundation as going to, okay, we're going to bring this in at $10,000, and something for $1,000 is a completely different enterprise there. And so writing for resource is the key thing. So as starting out, one of the things you need to do is identify your resources. What resources do you have? What do you have access to? I can call up Jimmy Board and say, Jimmy, do you want to do camera on my film? You owe me, right? And he will probably do that. In fact, on our credits, you'll see that we swap back and forth. Our production companies, mine is Golden Smelt, his is Shot Time. You'll see co-produced by Shot Time, co-produced by Shot Time. In other words, we trade resources. People who have cameras, people who have equipment. In other words, you build a community, an ensemble of people that you can come to and say, let's make a film. Now this, in many cases, requires a different mentality. This is not a sort of richly hierarchical system. I'm going to show you a clip today from my most recent film called Carmilla Vive, okay? Which if you look at the credits, the screen, there's 7 screenwriters on this. And that's not writer's room stuff, those are the people who sat down and forged the script out. And so there was a sort of an agreement that we all liked the idea, and then we worked through it and produced this film at that level. So you have to write for resources, and to get there, you need to identify what resources you have. We're not going to watch the clip today, but the first film we did this way was called Carmilla, and the way that started was my friend in Davenport, Iowa. You know, I went to visit him, and he bought this old 19th century mansion. It was like the Addams Family house, and it was all trashed and funky. And I go, whoa, this is like a horror film. And he goes, yeah, if you want to use it. And it has a restaurant kitchen in it, I'll cook for you. And immediately, you know, I came back and go, I show people the pictures of this huge mansion out in the woods. And I go, horror film. Start working on ideas. And we used that location. We had this big asset that people pay lots of money. They build sets for. And not only did we have the location, but this guy cooked for the crew while we were there on that front. Just to, give him a producer's credit. Okay, that's the thing you need to do. You need to look at your assets. What are the locations around Chicago? You already got an idea of what you like to do. And what's really shocking is the degree to which people don't exploit locations around Chicago. This is a location rich, like within an hour, we shot part of the film that we're gonna see today at the dunes up north in Michigan, right? But we've shot at caves down by Kankakee. We've done all the, in other words, we're in a resource environment for the films, the kind of area that I work in. On a summer's day, we go visit places and we take pictures and go, this is a great location, and it's free. Or you go up and if it's a state park, you talk to the ranger, you got issues with people filming here? No, go ahead. So you constantly are in this state of thinking about your resources, identifying your resources, who has cameras, who has lighting equipment. Right now, my GH5 is some other person is using it to shoot their film, and they will help me. This person actually does really nice props, like for different kinds of things. And so that person is going to be making me props in the future on that level. So this gets into that whole notion of rather than this is what I mean by industry, because we're talking about a system of reciprocity, where you build a community and you then work with people, and there's an implicit, I'm an anthropologist too, and there's an implicit notion, that I help you, I shouldn't even have to ask you to help me on my project, right? On that. That was one of the terms when I was undergraduate in studying anthropology. Reciprocity was an important concept on that level. And so you're going to build your community ensemble, and then you're going to get reciprocity. And then part of that is going to be trading labor, trading equipment, all of these kinds of things that can be swapped out on that level. Now, the other thing is you need to design for low-cost production resources that are available to you on that level. And that could be cameras, that could be workspaces, all sorts of things. So you need to have sort of your book of resources that are cheap, things that are cheap. I'm going to come back with this low-cost production resources, because one of the problems that people have that I've noticed around here, and I've met with students from other colleges who I'm going to shoot my short film, it's going to cost me $50,000, but we can't raise the money. And I go, why does it cost $50,000? And then there's this huge line item of $600 a day for an Aeroflex camera. And I go, why are you spending $500 a day on an Aeroflex camera? You don't need it. Nobody will notice the difference when it goes up on the screen. Bottom line. That's all marketing of technology. So you need to start identifying low-cost technologies. And that also is going to relate to your style of film on there. Once again, you're going to be filming on location for the most part, though I should point out Primer, which is a science fiction film, they build all these sets out of cardboard and stuff for it. So they actually built really low-cost sets for the film Primer, which is a really famous sci-fi. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. All right. And then, of course, once you've gone through this, this is all in planning. You need to plan rigorously at that level. If you follow Nolan's work, they rehearsed and walked through that without shooting film for like a year ahead of time. So that when they got rolled film, they were literally oftentimes doing, if anybody's worked in film here, one take and hoping that it was good. All right, in other words, but that's because the actors already knew the blocking, the performance, and everything. So planning can become very important. The other thing that we're coming up with, I should probably reverse this, is you may be using non-actors, right? Or relatively beginning actors and amateurs and things like this. Two of the best, well, I should say 3 of the best actors I ever had were non-actors. Some people, I was listening out to the radio this morning, they were interviewing people, and what the director said, some people are born to be actors. You know, they can just do it. And I found that to be true. And so as part of working with non-actors, you need to think about, do I need a hard script? So you got to read these lines as they're here, or are you going to do a plan on scene? Like, you know, this notion that you're going to, like, here's the idea, here's some basic points, you need to say this, but then allow for improvisation around it. Now that you're using digital cameras and not shooting 16 or 35 millimeter film, you can do multiple takes, you can do all these things. That's not ramping up your cost a lot. So I should point out that that's a whole directing class, the different methods of doing improvisation. The other thing you're gonna do is small crews. When you set up these crews, some of the people, if you watch Carmilla Vive, they have like 3 credits, right? You know, the prop department, editing assistant, doing the work with the downloading the digital files on set, all that kind of stuff. And they did multiple positions on it. So crew members doing multiple jobs becomes part of having a small crew that you're going to be working with. And of course, efficient scheduling is also an important part of that. The other thing that we need to think about, this comes back to that issue of I want to shoot my short film, and it's costing me a lot of money because I have to rent all this really expensive equipment, okay, on this front. In the past 20 years, as I've said, there's been huge advances in technology on, you know, as particularly in digital cameras and digital audio recording, all right? And so at this point, we have all this equipment that is not just better, but cheaper. And the obvious example of that now is like the iPhone Cine cameras, you know, that are actually do a pretty good job. And I should point out, I think I put it up there, is these are a lot more advanced than Sean Baker's. How many people have seen Tangerine, right? Shot on an I thought it was an iPhone 6, and I always go back and recheck my sources, and it was an iPhone 5 that it was shot on, which is a pretty crummy cine camera in a lot of ways. And you can set it up with apps. But my point is that there's all this technology that's available to you that's relatively cheap. I started out using a Lumix GH5 camera, which is now available, you know, for $395, $400 used on the market. It's an excellent camera. I know James Choi started some of his projects shooting with that camera. So there's lots of, and I put cheap because that's really relevant to you know, relative to your economics, right? But with that said, all this equipment is available. You cannot get into the trap that you need to go rent Arriflexes. And the big fad that I've seen around here is these new VR digital wall studios, which cost a lot to rent. If you look at most of the big production sci-fi films, what technology do they use? Still, to this day, green screens, right? And we know green screen technology is super cheap. It's just paint or green fabric. So you need, when you're doing this, is realize that there's a whole system meant to make you think you need the newest, latest Arri camera with all the decking out on it, and that you need to rent a very expensive day rate digital VR studio. No, you don't, no, you don't, no, you don't. And a lot of the biggest movies you've seen don't necessarily use that technology. In fact, some of the major motion pictures, besides Sean Baker, have used like the Sony, is it the SX30, the little Sony digital camera, X30, anybody know this model, right? That's what they've been shooting major feature films on. So don't get sucked into that notion, because you will meet people from schools and other places, well, I won't work without an Arriflex. And then you go, well, thank you for your time, goodbye, right? I know, you know, so that's the whole issue. You can produce really good images with an iPhone, as you know. It maybe requires you to learn the limitations. All equipment has limitations built into it on that front. And so the big thing is to start doing research, because the data is available online. You can research what the new best cheap camera is within your price range and all that kind of stuff. Likewise, you can, I was going to mention that then a lot of this stuff is free. such as your audio recording. You can set up your iPhone to be a good audio recorder. You can buy a microphone for it. A lot of this stuff is really relatively cheap, free, and adaptable on that level and at that cost. One of the advantages of the new cameras is they're relatively light sensitive. Unlike the older cameras, they'll shoot in available light and they'll produce a good image, which means you don't need to have a lot of heavy lighting equipment on your set or rented or purchased. So you can work. For part of one of our films that got dark, we pulled an LED light off a bicycle, right? Turned it on and put it through some fabric in close up and got a beautiful image. Okay, you don't need huge lighting things with egg crate filter, all this kind of stuff. You just don't need it. It might be nice to have, but then you have to have crew transport for all this stuff, all right? So you can design from this top to bottom, all of this. I should point out audio, I kind of lapsed into that right now, but you got your camera, you're gonna need audio equipment on that front. You can now set up your phones as really good audio recorders. Your iMacs, your laptops can be used as audio recorders. The quality is very good on that. And I should point out that a lot of the technology, which is totally different, is free. One of the best audio editors available, DaVinci Resolve. You can get the free version, which is perfectly fine for anything most of us are doing at that level. That's an excellent one, and there's lots of training. Remember, online training, online research on there. And then also, most of you know that your computers come with some kind of little audio editor. If you want to go beyond that, you can get Reaper Digital Audio Workstation, which is as good as anything out there. You have to learn it, but I should point out they'll send little things like, how you liking it? And then they'll ask, wouldn't you like to donate some money? I've donated money to them because it's like, this is incredible that you put this up for free on that. So there's all of this free technology. And as Henry's gonna mention, one of the advantages you have from the first 20 years of my life in filmmaking is we could make films that no one would ever see. Because they were on film or they were on videotape, and you didn't have a mechanism to get it out to people other than to set up screenings, maybe show it at a festival, and we now have, if nothing else, YouTube. So in other words, your work will be seen, and then you can do research on monetizing it at that level. I'm going to show you a clip from our most recent film. It was shot with a GH5 Lumix, which is one of my favorite cheap cameras. I can talk about that after we're off the time schedule here, if anybody has any questions. But there are tons of good, inexpensive cameras that will deliver. Like I said, people are using these things for feature films now. So that's not an issue. Okay, this is from our most recent film, Carmilla. This film is a little bit about how I come about it. And if we ever want to have a talk about writing for resources and scripting, this is a script that came out of really, on one level, a stupid idea. We used to always, in my horror film class, we'd watch like the Hammer films, and there's these films about the beautiful female vampire who seduces the young women. They were mostly, about, nudity and stuff. But it was really interesting because the vampire, Carmilla, was always more interesting than the guys in the movie. And then I said, well, why don't we have Carmilla win? And the young women turn on the dudes and the thing, and like completely invert this. That was the beginning of, and then we went to, Carmilla is a book by anybody familiar, Sheridan LeFanu did Carmilla. It's available online. You can go to the Carmilla Vive site, and there's a link to a free version of it. It's actually the original full-blown novella of vampirism, okay, to put on there. And so this is a film that evolved out of this, but also as we were working on this, when we started the screenwriting, there was several articles in the Chicago Reader at that time, God, was it print then? That were about women being harassed in bars. And there was this big men's movement trolling stuff, literally that, if you go up to a woman and you go, hey, can I buy you a drink? And she says no. Well, you need to force yourself on her. In other words, you need to put them in their place. This stuff was happening, and it's still happening now. And so we wrote that into this film. So this is a film about vampires and trolls, except the trolls are online trolls who also do this stuff in real life on it. And Carmilla, who we're gonna see here, is the vampire who in our films, is much more than a vampire. Carmilla is the great goddess Morrigan, the creator who's come back to reclaim, doesn't like how things are going, so we're gonna make them better.
Yo, why is your... Where's Laura and Carmilla?
Goddesses should never be late.
Do something.
I could take this all away.
No. This is mine.
Let me at least do this. I can't stand seeing you this way.
I'm ready now.
Hello? Are you okay? Carmilla, where are you? Something's wrong with Bridget.
I'm with them now. Where are you?
I was on my way, but I think I'm being followed. What should I do?
What are you willing to do?
Carmilla, where are you?
I'm going to talk for a little bit about some of my projects, and then we will take a break and regroup and have more of a dialogue, and you can ask questions of both of us, and we'll do some exercises to think about how you can maximize your resources. But I am a filmmaker and I've made 2 feature films, 2 no budget feature films. Sorry, I don't have slides, but my first no budget feature was called Dog Movie, and it is all improvised. I shot it for $1,000, and I very much, like Jeff was saying, decided to make a project that would fit with this like low budget method that I wanted to try out. So there's 3 actors, all of whom are my close friends, and in one case my partner. And I said to all of them, will you do this with me? And I won't pay you up front, but once I recoup whatever I spent on this, then we'll just split all profits on this movie 4 ways forever. And they said yes. So then I shot it on myself on a camcorder. I wish I brought my camera today, but it's a Sony AXR 430. It's like literally this. Like it's like a consumer camcorder basically, but it's 4K and has really good low light. And I basically followed, is anyone familiar with Dogma 95? Yeah, so I basically followed most of the Dogma 95 rules. So I did not use any lighting other than what was available, and it was all shot in one house that one of the actors lived in at the time. So I'll show the trailer for that.
One more thing about the dog.
His name is Blue.
That's my name.
It'll be fine.
They're gonna be fine.
It'll be fine.
It will definitely be fine.
I mean, it's totally fine. I just wish you guys would have talked with me about stuff like this. Like, I live here too.
Yeah, but
I mean,
like short term.
Is the suitcase clean or dirty right now?
It's mostly pretty clean.
Are you sleeping in the tub?
Oh yeah, Blue took my bed.
They buy weed more than anyone that I know, that I've ever known. And they have no job. I don't even know where they're getting the money for the weed.
I hate you. Idiot.
That's why it's out. Yeah, so with that, the only crew member, I did hire someone to do sound, so like lavs and boom ops, because my first short film, I did kind of skimp on the sound, and I really regretted that. So I was like, okay, that's the one thing I'm gonna pay for, and I'm not gonna do that myself. But all the rest of the crew stuff was just me. A whole other workshop about how to actually do an improvised film, but yeah, it was totally improvised. So with the sound person, I just paid him up front in a normal day rate, the way I would normally pay a crew person, and then the cast and I share the rest. And so I had also, on the distribution end, I also like throw screening events and program films. So it's very easy for me to just have my own event for things. And you know, film festivals don't usually pay you, or if they do, it's not very much. But because I was experienced with having screenings, I just was able to like book it as both a programmer and a filmmaker. So we had the world premiere at the Gene Siskel. They let us do a 50-50 box office split, and we made back the entire budget and more. So with that one screening, I made back my $1,000 that I spent on the sound guy and like some food and a couple props. And then we went into the split, and then I was self-distributing it for a while, and because I had like theater contacts from doing this work in another capacity, so I was able to book it at a bunch of screenings and actually get paid for it. It has been to a few festivals as well, but like places where I already had connections, but we've made most of the money actually from like hosting our own screenings, and then it did end up getting picked up by a distributor, and here, well, I mean, this is like a one, also good DIY lesson, this is all run by one person, and let me find it. Okay, here, and then it is available on Vimeo on demand, so this is like a really good option for self-distributing online. You can rent it for $3.99. You can buy it, and when you do the buy download option, there's bonus features. So basically, you can just, if you do Vimeo on demand, like you set your own price, and they take a very small cut. You know, I have a distributor, so we're splitting this, but then like everything I get from that split with the actors. Yeah. I forgot if I was gonna say something else about this, but yeah, that's Dog Movie. And then after that, I made another improvised feature with some of the same people, and with that one, it's like, so Dog Movie is like clearly like a narrative film, right? Oh, and one more thing I do want to say about Dog Movie with the camera. So like, there are times when in the low light, it got like a ton of digital grain. And when I shot it in 2022. When I was first getting feedback for it, I had a lot of people say, is there any way you can reshoot those dark scenes? It's so grainy, it just really doesn't look good. And I was like, I just can't, I'm sorry. And it's only been a couple years, but now people are telling me that they love that. And they're like, it's so cool how you had the digital grain. Oh my God, that was so unique. And so, you know, I think this is a good lesson that like now, of course, like 16 millimeter is so in vogue, right? And people think that looks really cool. Well, the thing is, that was just the cheaper option in the time, and now there's like a nostalgia for it. So, you know, there's always gonna be nostalgia for something that was very cheap and not considered very like high, whatever, in the past. And, you know, I think it's so interesting that what I did that happened really fast in like 3 years. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily nostalgia, but you know, when the first time people were seeing this like high level of digital grain, they're saying it looks bad, and then 3 years later, people are saying it's like really cool and unique. So, yeah. So then I made another movie, and the actor who, Milo, is the actor who also, she does location sound sometimes when she's not acting. So we decided to make this movie, and there was literally no budget, no crew except for the two of us, and I was filming, and she was like the primary subject. And then what we did for audio is we had lav mics that plug into our phone. We downloaded a free app called Voice Record Pro that allows you to adjust the gain of the mic, and then we just like did that and with the same camera. So this film is called Puppy Girl. It's still actually a work in progress, but I'll just show like a short clip from this. It's a work in progress, and it's doing festivals, and it's got distribution with that same distributor. So, but you know.
Yeah, and it was always like would, not like would be down to be here. Although those two are clearly the same thing, for me.
What are the same thing?
Like would you know, smash, and you know, like would be down to exist.
In their
shoes. In their shoes, yeah.
Would you describe yourself as a narcissist?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the nicer things about me. I don't know.
That you're a narcissist.
Yeah. Like I've like actually only kind of recently decided that I wasn't asexual. I did like 4 years of asexuality, and like, you know, like in May, like decided I wasn't. Yeah, it was like, and yeah, like you know, a couple months ago. My friend Henry, Chicago filmmaker, you might know him, cast me in his next movie as this like cis girl slut who's like in a codependent relationship with like the ghost that's haunting her pussy. You know, as I was thinking about the role, I was like, I like do not like express desire or attraction like in a way that is legible to other people like at all. And I kind of realized that like I really like wanted, you know, like wanted to be able to. Yeah, so I just like started going on like a lot of dates, like, which has been like really fun. And so yeah, I guess like I'm working both for the film, but also mainly for my life, because it's just like a nice thing to do to like go on dates with cute girls.
It's a noble reason to create art. Would it be alright if I kissed you?
Yeah, I'd like that a lot.
Okay.
Actually, I probably should have said this earlier or whatever, but Henry's making a documentary about my preparations for the role as Chastity and like my method acting process, and has been filming us this entire time. He's over there in the bushes. Is that all right?
Oh.
That's part of that film. She was in on it. She was mic'd, and there was not actually bushes there. I taped leaves to a bench to get that effect. But yeah, so this film, you know, we literally didn't spend any money. I mean, we already had those like lobs and the camera and things. I mean, we spent money on like some of the places we went to during it and like food and stuff. But we had like 10 of our friends in it. But yeah, they all just were like down to do it because it was like a fun project, and we only took up a little bit of their time. I think that's another thing I want to mention. If you're like labor bartering, using non-actors especially, or like people that aren't used to film sets, and if this is like a no budget production, you don't need to do really long days. And I think that's part of what makes it more feasible for people to volunteer, especially people that aren't used to working on film sets. Because like when I've worked with non-actors and I'll be like, yeah, just 10 hours, they're like, what the fuck? That's crazy. So like, but again, if you're totally overhauling the way you're making movies, you do not need to do these days. And I would honestly recommend not doing that if you can avoid it. But yeah, so this film, and then I ended up spending some money on post, like with Dog Movie. Again, like Milo is a sound person and did all of the audio mixing, but it was honestly really annoying to like work on it with a collaborator, and like it just kind of took forever. And then I ended up deciding for the next one, it was worth it to me to pay someone else to do it so that we're not kind of using like that sort of precious like creative energy on that. And yeah, and then so like as Jeff was saying, you know, off the strength of like these projects and how they've like spread, I'm now going to be making a micro budget film next year with like $100,000 budget, because a production company like was interested in my work, but I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity without just putting something forward that like has, you know, my clear voice. Okay, cool. That's all my stuff.
Bravo.